Call to order, please.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I would like to welcome all the guests joining us electronically to this virtual meeting of the Committee of the Whole. Today's agenda lists all of the items before Council for consideration. The recommended motions on today's agenda are shown in boldface. Copies of the agenda have been posted on our website. This meeting is being live streamed, and any participation in the meeting proceedings will become part of the public record. The recording from the meeting will be published on the county's website immediately and can be viewed by selecting the streaming tab on the county's homepage at thecounty.ca. Under agenda item 5, there will be no comments from the audience today. Members of the public who wish to provide comments at future meetings can do so by contacting clerks at pecounty.on.ca to register. Your name will be included in the council minutes and form part of the public record posted to the county's website. We also have 2 deputations. When you speak, please state your full name and address your comments to the chair. Following your deputation, there may be questions from members of council, and I will note that you have 10 minutes for your deputations. Any motion made at this meeting is not final until the council meeting of June 23rd, 2020, at which time the council may approve, amend, defer, or otherwise change the motion made by this committee. As a matter of housekeeping, in the event of fire, please use the applicable exits wherever you are tuning in from. Please turn off or mute all cell phones and remove your hats. That should move us on to item number 2, 2.1, confirmation of the agenda. Madam Clerk, I've got Councillor Bullock with Councillor Mcnaughton. Madam Clerk.
Mayor Ferguson and Councillor Mcnaughton. Mayor Ferguson, would you please read the motion?
This is, who's the seconder?
Councillor Mcnaughton.
Okay, the Ferguson Mcnaughton motion that the agenda for the Committee of the Whole meeting of June 11th, 2020 be confirmed.
Do I have questions? All in favor? Thank you, that carries. Item number 3, disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Madam Clerk, I don't believe we have any today. I'll ask if anybody does have. Seeing none, we will move on to item number 4, deputations. 4.1 is a deputation from Matthew O'Connor to address the committee regarding future impacts of unsafe wireless infrastructure in PEC. Is Matthew with us right now?
Through you, Mr. Chair, he is. He's just joining us.
Okay.
Hello, how are we doing, Council?
Matthew, very good. I'll let you know again, as I mentioned in preamble, you have 10 minutes and there may be questions afterwards. Please go ahead.
Okay, sounds great. Okay, so the purpose of my deputation today is to ask Council to consider the potential catastrophic impacts of allowing unsafe wireless infrastructure to be implemented in Prince Edward County. So where are we today with wireless technology safety? How many of us have read the small print on our smartphone, Wi-Fi router, Bluetooth speaker, or even understand the way internet, music, video, and gigabytes worth of information are beamed from one wireless device to another? The answer is through electromagnetic pulse frequencies in the billions of pulses per second. The antennas connected to this are monitored by the Innovation Science of Economic Development using Health Canada safety limits, as we know. But however, there's no long-term studies that have been done by the telecom industry, and they're done by engineers measuring only the heat absorption of the organism. So before I get too much into the science, there's been no major revisions that have been done to the major exposure limits since the 1970s. In 2015, they simply added the new spectrum to their safety code 6. So we've got the longest study done by the US government over a 10-year period and replicated by an Italian lab showed a significant association between cell phone radiation and heart and brain tumors in rats. The World Health Organization in 2011 classified cell phone radiation as a Class 2B carcinogen. Currently, the neuroepithelial brain tumors that are associated with wireless radiation are spiking in adolescents in the US, and a new form of illness known as electrohypersensitivity has passed the number of peanut allergies in the US population. So after decades of research, we have hundreds of peer-reviewed studies from biologists, epidemiologists, and cancer researchers that show that human cells and their DNA are damaged by current wireless devices. Even Wi-Fi, which was introduced with no safety warnings, has been proven to cause damage to sperm, cellular DNA, and changes in our hormones. Evidence of cell death was also evidenced. I urge you all to briefly read the science on your wireless devices and cell antenna radiation that I submitted in my material. But why am I here today? See, the telecom industry, in collaboration with big tech, want to add a newer, untested frequency that has only previously been used in the military and body scanners to move to a new, denser blanket of coverage of all urban and rural areas around the globe. Now, blanketing the entire city of Toronto has been going on. We've got Kingston, where they've tested the new spectrum and frequency, and this has been happening around the world. Already, Picton's Macaulay Heritage Park, which only has LTE and 4G, has a measured radiation level of 500 to 650 microwatts per meter squared. This makes it technically unsafe and dangerous to one's health to sleep in the park. And this is only with 2G, 3G, and 4G antennas so far. With Wi-Fi being installed in schools, LTE coverage sprawling, Bluetooth devices ubiquitous, our children and infants are being raised in a toxic smog of layered electromagnetic radiation. Much like secondhand smoke or air pollution, the effects are not as noticeable and take longer to reveal themselves. A huge wake-up call for public health has begun. As a resident of Cherry Valley for the past 3 years, I am planning to start a family here. It is of great concern for my partner and I to have our fertility and newborn baby be damaged by nearby cell antennas if Rogers, TELUS, or Bell are given the green light to move to the next generation of unsafe wireless antennas. This leap in technology is the biggest leap the industry has taken around the world, and Health Canada, unfortunately, is ignoring the 200 studies that I've attached, pointing to this leap being a biological, ecological, and healthcare catastrophe. It's no surprise that over 1,000 scientists worldwide have been demanding independent studies on this new generation. They've been signing petitions. After I personally reviewed all the federal guidelines and emailed 120 MPPs in Ontario, it became apparent that when it comes to the placement of any cell antennas, aside from land use zoning restrictions, as you guys know, the industry can legally install a cell tower next to a school, hospital, or home, so long as the distance from the structure of the land is greater than the height of the tower. So residents don't even need to be consulted or notified if it's not on their land use. An installation is deemed, if it's deemed a non-cell tower structure, they don't need to be notified at all. This includes the water towers, as we know, but lampposts and building rooftops. You can see that in the CPC section 2003. These federal exemptions allow service providers to legally install the new generation of whatever frequency they have purchased at the auction on lampposts every 2 to 8 houses, which is essential for the new infrastructure that they're rolling out in Kingston, Toronto, and American cities. This will connect to the local tower. But would you want a thicker, denser layer of electromagnetic radiation being installed without your consent next to the playground of your children's school, for example, or a military-grade, millimeter wave antenna installed outside your bedroom on a lamppost for your neighbor's internet? Such radiation travels only 200 meters, so the region would have to be thoroughly blanketed by these backpack-sized antennas. And I know we're not there yet, but it's something to consider. This is what Bell Mobile has already installed in Kingston and Rogers in Toronto. Now, these military antennas emitting this high frequency have the ability to severely damage the eye. TELUS installers working in British Columbia, for example, have actually had to assure that the frequencies are completely disabled when they're installing these antennas to avoid terminal blindness. Primary insurance providers have been steering clear of the telecom industry for obvious reasons. It is of great concern what adding an additional layer of high frequency radiation would do to the pollinators and the large population of migratory birds in the county. We already know that bees exposed to this invisible wireless radiation in the form of our devices lose the ability to find and return to their hive, causing a colony collapse. The next generation of technology, known as 5G, also requires a strong signal on those small cell antennas, which means cutting down any healthy trees in the line of sight. Already it's been halted successfully in Switzerland, Greece, Slovenia, Russia, Belgium, France, and even 469 municipalities in Italy, based on the precautionary principle, because a lot of these, this spectrum doesn't have any long-term or even short-term safety studies as of now. So the proposed solution, we understand that the CRTC designated both mobile and fixed broadband as basic services for all Canadians. The internet is here to stay. We all know that. It's essential for education, research, business, and overall quality of life. Here in the county, we have the opportunity to make internet accessible while avoiding a potential biological and ecological catastrophe and being an exemplary model of democracy with the precautionary principle. We can do this by completing the fiber circuit and utilizing the dark fiber that has already been installed. Fiber optic speeds can get as high as 1 gigabyte per second while emitting not a single microwatt of radiation. As you prepare to file a request for proposal offering free access to the water towers and buildings, it's extremely crucial that you block out or opt out of any of the high frequency antennas in the time being. They're disguised as new safe technology, and quite frankly, businesses do not require 10 gigabytes per second download speed to operate, and residents don't require this for streaming HD video or even video conferencing. For example, this right now is only 46 megabytes per second that we're doing this entire conference on. So as a concerned resident, I ask, who will take the responsibility for the severe risks associated with wireless tech and this leap to new antennas? Are you? Who is liable for the effects of this additional layer of toxic radiation in our schools, homes, and hospitals? Is the county prepared to deal with the spikes in chronic illness and degenerative disease? Non-native electromagnetic frequency and radiation has increased exponentially in urban areas already. If you go to Toronto right now and elsewhere, and essentially, why follow suit as they experiment, with the largest leap in technology and essentially without an ability for those residents to opt out. So we've got, it's absolutely crucial that when you guys file its request for proposal for funding for the infrastructure with EORN, that you choose service providers with safe fiber optic technology and not military grade wireless antennas. Due to the dangerous gap in federal safety guidelines and the Health Canada Code 6, even these lower frequency LTE cell towers need to be strategic safe distances from, for example, the bird sanctuaries, hospitals, schools, and homes. Ironically, the county's weak internet infrastructure might be an advantage. By trailing behind when installing internet infrastructure, council and the EORN have a unique opportunity to choose safer, more reliable, and more cost-effective internet solutions while the other cities experiment. We have the opportunity to be an example for the rest of the province to work in harmony with economic prosperity, tourism, and agriculture and health. We have farm-to-table markets, bird sanctuaries, the longest freshwater beach in the world, expanding tourism. We can also have fast, reliable internet too, without an unsafe, biologically toxic blanket of radiation. We cannot ignore the severe consequence of negligence in these decisions, which would jeopardize the safety of the entire Prince Edward County population and its ecosystem. Thank you, Mayor Ferguson, and thank you, council members.
Matthew, thank you very much. Do I have questions from council? I don't see any, and
Mayor Ferguson has a question.
sorry, and Councillor Roberts, Councillor Maynard. Mayor Ferguson?
Thank you very much, Matthew, for your presentation and research. Just if I could, what's your background?
I'm actually a hockey player with a business degree and a lot of free time on my hand to read independent research papers. I hope to go back to school for biology.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Councillor Roberts. Don't forget to unmute.
Thank you. Very interesting presentation, and thank you for that deputation. There's a lot of science bouncing between ionizing and non-ionizing radiation. And certainly ionizing radiation has proven harmful effects pretty much unanimously in the science community. But non-ionizing radiation is you know, you got a whack of studies over here that say it's not that harmful, and you got a whack of studies, as you cited, that say it is really harmful.
Right.
How do you, and non-ionizing is what 5G is all about, the supposedly not that harmful.
Right.
How did you come to your very adamant conclusion, given the mixed bag of research out there?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. So the 45 studies that, for example, Health Canada is using are done by engineers looking at the heating effects. So it's called the SAR value. So your smartphone and everything, what they do is they put the organism near that exposure and they measure how much heat is radiating. Even in non-ionizing radiation, you get some little bit of temperature increase. However, those are 45 studies done by engineers who are not able to spend the time and look at what actually goes on in the cell. So the cell membrane has its own voltage ion channels. I won't use your time to go into essentially the mechanism, but it's in a lot of those papers. I have a lot of PDFs I could send you. But essentially what you have is the engineers looking at the thermal absorption, and then you have what goes on in the cell. So that double strand DNA break, you can't measure that just by looking at, you know, and testing through Petri dishes of heat absorption, et cetera, like what we would do with the pile that industry uses. And it's a real inconvenient truth that we've all had to come to kind of realize is, unfortunately, those layers of radiation and of course more exposure, right? You know, the engineers can say 24/7 you're safe and good to go because it's just the heat, right? A baby in a room with Wi-Fi, if you're just looking at the thermal effects, is safe. But if you, unfortunately, even with children, as a newborn and children are more susceptible to the penetrative effects of a lot of these electromagnetics, you can actually see a lot more in those cases. But what it is you've got a crazy amount of oxidative stress. So you're adding kind of like any kind of carcinogen too, as well, like pollution and whatnot. It's something that is creating more oxidative stress, breaking DNA. When you go to bed at night, your body goes in and repairs some of that DNA. Some of the scratches, the researchers have said some are irreversible, which is another topic. So yeah, it's really simple. It's important to look at if you've got engineers doing the studies, and then if you've got, because they have these organizations, right? The ICRNP, if you dive into the research, and it's exhausting, but it's sort of undercover the tobacco of our generation, my generation, as we, you know, put up Bluetooth ear pods and everything, you know, you can't imagine that all being released with it being safe, right? Unfortunately, industry is doing what it can to not fund the biologists and the medical professionals who actually find those effects. So especially with the bees, I mean, the telecom industry isn't going to look at how insects and lobsters are affected by these same spectrums, right? Like lobsters use a lot of animals use their geomapping with like electromagnetics, right? There's a lot we don't know. And yeah, I don't want to use too much of your time for this question, but yeah, it's really important to differentiate between the thermal effects and the DNA damage, the sperm damage, the hormone damage, and the oxidative stress.
Councillor Maynard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Thank you, Matthew, for your deputation and giving us one more thing to think about. Just on a kind of a low level, I'm thinking, okay, so I'm sitting here at my desk in front of my iPad, about a foot and a half away from my wireless router, although I do get my internet through the Bell phone line. But yeah. So what would I be exposed to right now in this particular situation?
Well, and I forgot to mention, so right now, all that exposure is still non-ionizing. but that's all that we looked at with the effects. So that is still having a little effect. Now that is at 2.2 gigahertz. So your Wi-Fi router is still, if I were to do a chart, is like around here on the lower range. And you've got the LTE phones and the Bluetooth. Now, moving into the same non-ionizing frequency with 5G, they actually changed the wavelength. So it's a millimeter wavelength because that's what gives you that high speed. So the actual wavelength that's pulsing a billion times per second on our cells invisibly to share information is actually, so like, for example, I'm trying to show you this here. This is a smartphone that's just wired, you know, because my mother lives here and she's older and our house is on Ethernet. So we have fast internet, reliable, and yeah, and even LTE is one thing, like, you know, how when we have LTE coverage and EORN is pushing to have that. But yeah, I don't want to be the one to, I really urge everyone here to dive into the health effects of EMFs. I don't have enough time, unfortunately. I'd love to, I mean, I have all day. I just don't want to focus too much on that. But yeah, personally, we're all exposed. And the newer generation, unfortunately, has been exposed since birth. Like for me personally, I got my cell phone when I was 13. They added Wi-Fi in my high school, this and that. My skull is already thicker. The skull actually is, as an adult skull, is a lot better at protecting it than a child's skull. So unfortunately, yeah, if we're on Wi-Fi right now, Bluetooth, and there's actually 5 different antennas in a smartphone now. So it's important to make sure they're turned off at different times. It's all about lowering your exposure, right? I mean, we all know with carcinogens, you could have some people work at a coal plant and never get cancer, and their body's amazing at regenerating and detoxifying. And but if you're looking for anti-aging or optimum health and then fertility, you're going to want to make sure you're not pulsing your cells with billions of, you know, waves. So yeah, it's a very difficult topic to just condense into 10 minutes. But it's pretty amazing because in the county right now, the radiation levels are really low. Obviously in the city, I have a meter, and in Picton, the levels were around 500 to 600 because you have those 2 4G towers. But you know, elsewhere in the world, when you're traveling in airports, on airplanes, and then you're going through Toronto, your exposure is just this, it's getting layered and layered and layered. And you add autonomous vehicles, you add these antennas throughout, you know, the next 2030, the thing that tech is pushing for obvious reasons. And you're entering a zone where there's no control group because you've just blanketed everyone. So we don't know anymore if our health problems, like for example, neuropsychiatric issues, a lot of the sensitivity, we are electrical organisms. Our nerves and our tissues actually are electrical. Our heart beats with a polarity. So our heart is an electrical organ, and you can get heart palpitations if you're too close to some of these antennas. And you know, these are things that are obvious. Like if you work for telecom and you're installing an antenna, you're going to want to make sure it's off. But people who don't have the choice and don't know this, and your infrastructure is there for good, and you know, you're connecting all these small cell antennas because telecom doesn't want to hook up that fiber to that house. They don't want to have to go into the house, and they can make more of a margin on an antenna and move forward. But in that paper document on the written deposition or deputation, there's a quote from Timothy Shishel, and he's worked for the National Council of Science in the States, and they've pointed out of how much more energy efficient fiber optics is. I know the big movement for energy efficiency is coming as well. So you've got no radiation from the fiber optics. You can get up to 1 gigabytes per second. And then you have more safe, reliable, and less issues because you're not trying to beamform signals through trees. So again, the county needs, obviously, as we've seen with EORN, we need to get cell coverage, and that's a huge issue that you guys have to worry about. But I'm saying here, the main thing is we're actually at an advantage because in the meantime, we're able to choose the safer technology. And I think we're coming to a point where when is enough going to be enough? Because after 5G, it's 6G, it's 7G, you know, 2030, the kids are running around and, you know, they're probably going to have to jump in the lake to get rid of the heating effects. You never know if you live near a cell antenna. But yeah, I'm a guy that reads the science. So I just want Health Canada to read the science that looks at non-thermal heating effects. I'll definitely be focusing on that as a citizen of Canada. But in the meantime, for you guys, I know you guys are pushing for just allowing them the service providers to come in and get that internet to everybody as possible. But it's very important that we avoid the small cell antennas and continue a blanket of radiation on top of the 4G as it moves maybe from Kingston and Belleville, because Belleville's also got some of these antennas already as well, near Walmart and Toronto, Montreal. And in October of next year, iPhone and Samsung will release their 5G. So all the kids and everyone's going to want the new 5G speeds to be able to download that video in a split second, or that Netflix. But again, you're using another layer of radiation at a different wavelength. Like the millimeter waves, there's a reason. The only studies on millimeter waves are from Russian military studies that have been like declassified because it's such a powerful weapon. You can actually melt eyeballs with some of these electromagnetic frequencies. And in World War II, both parties had them. And they're, I'm not trying to say that telecom is putting that same power intensity or that same exact gigahertz, but you're moving really close to that, and you are making a leap into more dangerous. So fortunately for you, to conclude, in your room with Wi-Fi, luckily there's no 5G antenna on top of this in front of on your street, on Main Street. And luckily none of us here live right next to a cell tower, because it can't be the same height. Like I said, the height of the tower has to be this distance to like a school. But when you make the cell antenna the size of a backpack, and you have exemptions in the federal policy that allow you to put it on lampposts, you've just bypassed essentially any of the health safety limits, restrictions. So yeah, that's a lot to swallow. I know you guys are trying to get a lot to do. I'm very grateful for you guys and all the work that you do to help us recover from the lockdown. And internet is so important. I'm not here to say that we need to all be lying in our fields, eating raw organic honey and pretending there's no such thing as, damage to the trade-off here, right? But I am saying it's a huge advantage if we are able to understand how electromagnetic radiation works, and we stay in the 4G in the county, stay in the LTE, give us that good internet, give everyone the internet they need, and don't get pressured in by Bell, Telus, and Rogers to put this expensive, energy costly, unsafe, essentially experiment around the county. So thank you so much for your time, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Margetson. Mute. Ernie, unmute.
Thank you, Matthew, and for the summary you just gave us. And if I'm understanding you correctly, I just wanted to recap. You're saying that if we get proposals for antennae in the county, that we look or perhaps understand the maximum frequency, which you're suggesting would be 6 gigahertz. And also that we look into expanding our fiber optic network. And also be mindful of what proposals EORN brings before us for Prince Edward County. Would that summarize what you're telling us today?
Yes, that's a very clear and precise move to action. And the 6 gigahertz, ideally, because the LTE 4G antennas are already up, and those are in around 900 megahertz. So that's giving that's giving them a lot of room. I know the auction done federally was postponed because of COVID recently. I read in CBC like the 3.5 gigahertz. So I probably should make that a little bit lower, because it's still in the close to the millimeter wave frequency.
So just to follow up then, the 4G is 900 megahertz?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's quite a jump up to 6 gigs. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you very much.
They want to go to 60 gigahertz. Some American cities have that right now, and birds are falling out of the sky, but we don't have to get into
Well,
that.
like Councillor Maynard said, you've given us something to think about. I put it more like something to worry about. But
Yeah,
thank you for
unfortunately.
enlightening us. Yeah.
Councillor Roberts.
I just wanted to say, Matthew, that you just glossed over, I'm a hockey player. You're a pretty darn good hockey player and goalie. People might not know that you were drafted by the Ottawa Senators. And are you still signed with that Danish professional?
I actually got re-offered to come back, and I'm looking to go to Austria next season, but maybe not if there's too many antennas near the rink.
All-star teams in your day. So really nice having you here, Matthew.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Do I have any other questions? Councillor Mcnaughton.
Just quickly, I wanted to say thank you for the food for thought. You're gonna keep me up very late a few nights in a row reading, and I appreciate that. And I don't appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah.
Can I have a motion to receive, please? I believe I've got Councillor Harper, seconded by Councillor Nyman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a Harper Nyman motion that the deputation by Matthew O'Connor regarding future impacts of unsafe wireless infrastructure and PEC be received.
All in favor? Thank you, that passes. Next deputation is Judith Burfoot to address committee regarding the All Welcome Here organization. Is Judith with us right now?
You, Mr. Chair, she is with us. She's just
Hi,
joined.
Judith.
With that Danish professional team?
I actually got re-offered
And-
to come back.
Stop it, Bill.
Judith, you with us?
Hello, yes, I am. Sorry,
Hi.
you're a little delayed.
Oh, okay. Then hopefully we can work with the lag or the delay. Please go ahead, as long as everybody nods their head that they can hear you. You've got 10 minutes. Please go on.
Great, thank you. Hello, Mayor Ferguson and members of County Council. Thank you for having me. My name is Judith Burfoot, and today I'm speaking to you as the founder of All Welcome Here. The purpose of my deputation is to provide information about All Welcome Here and the community event held last week. I'd like to begin my remarks with a quote from Angela Davis. I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept. All Welcome Here was established in 2019 to begin the work of helping to build community for Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, or BIPOC, here in Prince Edward County. We are explicitly anti-racist organization with a focus on people of color here. Earlier this year, you may know, we received a municipal grant to support our work. So thank you to the county foundation and to the municipality for actively supporting our development before the COVID-19 pandemic and before the explosion of the Black Lives Matter movement. Based on community demand, we organized and led a massive community demonstration on Friday, June the 5th. We did it in a way that was mindful of social distancing and supporting our community by simultaneously prioritizing our health. For example, our volunteers were out on Main Street chalking X's on the sidewalk that were 6 feet apart, and participants were all directed to wear face masks. If you've seen the media coverage of the event, you'll know that while it wasn't perfect, we were largely successful. The OPP reported that there were over 1,000 people lining Main Street on Friday, from the top of Town Hill to past the McDonald's. They didn't count everyone in the cars and trucks honking and waving their signs in support, nor did the people following the demonstration online get counted who could not attend in real life for a myriad of reasons, including COVID-19. I want to acknowledge the unprecedented support from this community. To know that here in our small rural community, people, all people, were ready, willing, and able to come to the streets of Picton and stand in support of the Black Lives Matter movement and of their BIPOC neighbors and colleagues. They came in support and solidarity. They came to be part of the biggest civil rights movement this planet has ever seen. They came to say that it's time for a real, deep, long-lasting change to happen. And they came to say that they don't believe the lie that Canada isn't racist. They know that we have so many issues to address here, and they're here for it. I want to formally say thank you to the amazing co-organizers and volunteers from the BIPOC of PEC group who jumped into the fray and helped lead us all. Thank you to all the volunteers from the county community too, for being there to help however it was needed. Thank you to all the businesses who decorated their windows with Black Lives Matter signs and who donated water and drinks, signs and sign making materials, masks, hand sanitizer, and more. Thank you particularly to County staff member Emily Cowan, who worked tirelessly and supportively with the County Foundation to facilitate our ability to accept online donations so that people could actively support BIPOC and anti-racism work here in our county. Thank you to the OPP, who attended in a respectful and supportive manner. And we're already working with them to begin the necessary and difficult conversations around policing and racism, with the goal of improving relations between local law enforcement and BIPOC residents and visitors. Thank you to those of you on council who attended Friday. Know that we are just getting started to help make our county a dynamic, supportive, welcoming place for each and every person who lives and visits. I also want you to know that Black Lives Matter Canada sanctioned our event, and we're extremely thrilled with our participation as a rural community. During our event, we received cash donations in the amount of $232. We weren't actively seeking cash donations due to COVID-19, but some people were quite insistent and wanted to support. That money has been donated directly to Black Lives Matter Toronto, the chapter that's largely tasked with organizing here in Canada. And thanks to the County Foundation, we are able to accept online donations for our work. Since Friday and as of 9 o'clock this morning, we have accepted a total of $1,515. And that's from about 25 different donors and averages about $60, and mainly from individuals. Our online closed Facebook group for BIPOC in PEC has approximately 60 members right now. Our open Facebook group for everyone has over 500 followers, and we have over 700 followers on our Instagram page. And that page was started last week. This is incredible organic growth, and it's yet another indicator of how engaged our community is in this work. I'd like to start wrapping up by using another quote from Angela Davis. In a racist society, it is not enough to be non-racist. We must be anti-racist. So in conclusion, I'm asking each and every one of you to be anti-racist. I'm asking you to actively support and do the work that we and those 1,000 people demand of us. To do these three things, and of course more. Number one, support Black people directly. Support our businesses. Work to support our large Black migrant community here. Donate to Black-led organizations, and welcome us as neighbors and visitors. Educate yourself without asking others, particularly people of color, to do the emotional labor of teaching you. Google, read, get a copy of Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility. Challenge yourself, unlearn your biases. And three, spread that knowledge and be actively anti-racist. Spread it to all of your friends and neighbors. Challenge them when they say and do racist things. Stand up for us and speak up against racism. At work, online, at the hunting camp, and at girls' night and at the family dining table. Never be silent again. Not ever. Please connect with us online if you're looking for specific direction. We've already begun posting things you can do, places to get involved, books to read, petitions to sign, artists to follow and support, organizations to donate to, resources, and more is on the way. We're counting on everyone to support anti-racism and the Black Lives Matter movement in every way they can. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. Do I have questions, comments from council? Give me a sec. I've got Councillor Mcnaughton first.
Hi, Judith. Thank you. Thank you for that event last Friday. For the councillors who weren't there, I found it profoundly moving, and I was surprised at how deeply it struck a chord that so many people in our small rural community came out, and it felt like it. And it feels like in general that right now is a time where there's a critical mass that's hungry for change. And we also, and it coincides with this opportunity that we have with the state of the world because of COVID-19, that we've got an opportunity to go forward and reorganize our systems better and our institutions with a new eye to social justice, to equity. So I find this to be a hopeful time, and your efforts really reinforce that. I've already learned an awful lot from you and from your organization, even just in the past couple of weeks. And I will do, and I pledge to you right now, I will do my best so that your daughter never has to organize any events to look for allies to say that her life matters. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mcnaughton.
Councillor McMahon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for your deputation, Judith. I have a question though. I mean, okay, firstly, I wasn't able to attend your demonstration the other night, but my wife did, and she was quite impressed with the way it went off and how peaceful it was. And looking on social media and some of the pictures that she took, I noticed a number of people were holding defund police banners. Does your organization have a position on that? And if so, how does that play out?
Yeah, we absolutely do. I think that how I would frame that discussion right now is that it's defund police, refund social care, right? So I think when you hear defund the police, people get very reactive and frightened, and that shouldn't be what it is. I think, for example, one of the biggest rallying cries right now is that the police are asked very often to do mental health checks. And why are there not mental health workers there to assist with that? We've gutted those services. And I say we because we're all voters here, right? And it's time to make that change. We need mental health support in our community. It needs to be a priority, not just here, obviously, across the province and across the nation. Does that go a little way to answer your question?
That answers my question. It's the way I wanted it to be answered.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, there's just so many social services that we've really gutted, right? And
Great.
I mean, I don't know what our police budget is here. I'm going to have that conversation with Staff Sergeant Hatch on Monday. But I know people have been talking about the City of Toronto's budget being $1.2 billion. That's a horrifying amount of money when there aren't supporting social services for that, for people in need.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Judith. I didn't know what to expect when I attended on Friday. And I have to say that it was, at a personal level, very moving and you know, very special, something that my wife and I will I've talked about a lot, and with family and neighbors. And so thank you for that. And it was well organized.
Thank you.
I think in terms of where I'm coming from with regard to our OPP is that we should be very thankful that we have someone as Staff Sergeant John Hatch leading our OPP detachment. And we had another deputation by him where he recounted that his efforts and his detachment's efforts at community wellness and community engagement at exactly the way you've articulated, Judith, were being held up as the gold standard for the OPP provincially in terms of commitment to those goals. So I think we have a bit of a leg up in that discussion. My original question was going to be, Judith, that BIPOC has, at its genesis, as I recall it, had a very strong component around LGBTQ concerns and issues as well. And you didn't reference that in what you shared with us just now. So I wonder, is that something on the side, or is...
Yeah, so I'm not sure that I would have characterized it like that. So what I didn't mention, and I apologize, I probably should have, is that the organization strives to be consciously and actively aware of intersectionalities, right? So that we understand that you may be BIPOC, but you may also be part of the LGBTQ community. You may be an older person or a younger person, right? You may have disabilities, you may have mental health challenges, you may be dealing with poverty, you may have childcare issues. So for example, we said that all of our in-person meetings would have free childcare. So that is absolutely true, right? It's impossible to separate pieces of ourselves in that way. And bigotry is bigotry, right? Having said that, our focus is about BIPOC people, right? So I just want to be clear about that, but absolutely in support and cooperation.
Do I have any other questions or comments from council? Whoops. And I've just lost my screen. There we go. Mayor Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks very much, Judith, for this. And thank you for all the work you put into last week. It was really quite a, I think has been recognized broadly, an extraordinary event. It was extremely moving, and talking to people, listening to what they had to say as I walked up both sides of the street. But so congratulations. I think this is a timely deputation. But the question I have is, welcome to the world of Zoom meetings. Some of the statistics you raised or mentioned just before your second quotation from Angela Davis broke up, and I'm wondering if you could repeat those. I think they had to do with the numbers of supporters and dollars and that sort of thing. Would you mind repeating that?
Not at all, not at all. So I mentioned that we received $232 in cash at the event, which we were not seeking, and that was donated to Black Lives Matter Toronto. Online through the County Foundation, as of 9 o'clock this morning, we have received $1,515. It's about 25 donors, and those are mainly individuals, so there are a few businesses who are donating as well. Our closed online group just for BIPOC members has approximately 60 members. The open Facebook page, All Welcome Here, has over 500 followers. And our Instagram page, which is at All Welcome Here, has over 700 followers now.
Okay. Those are the stats I missed. Thank you very much. And again, congratulations. And this was an event that was organized in a matter of days. Yes, so it was quite extraordinary.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Can I just circle back on the OPP?
Please, go ahead.
to let you know, I've known Sergeant Hatch for a few years now, and I think he, in terms of organizing this, was one of the first people that I contacted to speak with. They were supportive from day one. And his approach to policing, I think, is exceptional. And I also am leery of what happens if we get a new staff sergeant.
Well, we're going to try and keep him.
Well, yes, right. But, and then the second thing that I wanted to mention, and I apologize if I'm interrupting anyone's question, is I just wanted to let you know personally of a number of BIPOC people that I met on Main Street and spoke to who were in tears, who couldn't believe how many people showed up for us. And so that is the thank you comes from me and from them, that you're there. It means a lot. Do the work, but that meant a lot.
Do I have anybody else who wishes to comment? I don't see any more hands. Judith, thank you very much. If I can get Councillor McMahon, seconded by Councillor Maynard, to receive this deputation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is McMahon Maynard motion that the deputation of Judith Burfoot regarding All Welcome Here organization be received.
Just 1 second, if you don't mind, before we vote. Councillor Mcnaughton, you have a point?
I think our clerk was mentioning that we could, while we refer it to staff, we could also look to offer support to the organization by making it, Catalina, I'm sorry, could you give me the wording? By
Through you,
an
Mr.
organization
Chair,
of
Judith,
interest?
Judith, are you still looking to make this a project of community interest?
I don't know. I think
'Cause
that
this
sort
would
of
be-
got held up. I think so. Like, I think that was the foundation reason for me being put on the agenda for today.
So
But
I would move that if,
Give me a sec, Councillor McNaughton.
sure.
Brad, sorry, Councillor Nyman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is there an amendment to the motion or the one that's on the agenda? Is that what we're voting on, or what's the amendment?
Madam Clerk.
Your worship, it's just an addition to receive the deputation and refer it to staff. If that's applicable still, I'll refer to Madame CAO to speak on the matter if that's what the intent of the deputation was, or if it was just for information and awareness.
Councillor Nyman.
So what's the point of, like, what are we referring it to staff for?
Yeah.
Actually, I'll refer to Madame CAO to speak on the matter.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So a question for Judith, is the Community Foundation issuing tax receipts for the donations that you've collected to date?
I don't know.
Okay, so that would be the only reason. So my understanding was that there was discussion of whether or not the county as a municipality could issue tax receipts.
Right.
I believe that has been worked out, that the county foundation is issuing the receipts.
Okay.
If that is not the case, then the way it would be possible is staff would need to bring forward a report to discuss whether or not this group should become a project of community interest, which would then allow us to issue receipts. But it is my understanding that if the county foundation is accepting donations, they can issue the receipts, and this is no longer necessary. But perhaps what we could do is accept the council can accept the deputation and the motion as drafted. I will look into that, and if there is still a gap, we can bring a report forward.
Perfect, thank you.
So we're still back at the original motion. Can I have the vote, please? All in favor? Thank you, that passes. Judith, thank you very much.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
You too. I am now moving to item 5, comments from the audience. I'm given to understand we have none. Item number 6, items for consideration. 6.1, report of the Community Services Programs and Initiatives Department dated June 11th, 2020 regarding parking approach during, sorry? Parking approach during the COVID-19 economic recovery. Can I have that motion put on the floor? This is a Prinzen motion, but I need a seconder. Margetson. This is a Prinzen-Margetson motion. Councillor Prinzen, if you could read that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a Prinzen-Margetson motion that council received report CSP-33 2020 for information, and that paid parking be reinstituted in Picton as of July 1st, 2020, and that 3, staff bring forward to the June 23rd, 2020 meeting of council an amended bylaw 4249-2018 to include a 2-hour parking limit in the commercial areas of Bloomfield and Wellington. And 4, that council directs staff to include the concerns expressed by the Picton Business Improvement Association in the upcoming parking study being conducted by the municipality.
Todd, would you like to speak to this?
Thank you, Councillor Bailey, and through you, just a few comments on this report. You'll recall at the last committee of the whole or council meeting, I can't remember now the date, the Picton BIA came forward with a request for free parking for the balance of 2020 for the Picton Main Street in particular. And had a list of challenges related to signage and or protocols related to parking in the specific to the Picton Main Street. So my report is a response to that. I have provided a recommendation that we reinstitute paid for parking as of July 1st. And that we look to address anything that can be addressed that they brought forward related to signage that are within budget limitations. We would be happy to try and work on, and any of the greater concerns related to the parking program, we push forward to the parking study that is being. We're in the process of, well, our department's not in the process, but the planning department is in the process of administering. I also suggested in the report that in the that while we are going to be studying paid parking in areas like Bloomfield and Wellington with a report to come back in time for budget in 2020, the 2021 budget to have paid for parking, that we move to turn spots on the main street in the commercial areas to a 2-hour limit to encourage the movement of people in and out and an acknowledgement of the limitation of parking in the various areas. So that's the sort of, I guess, the Cole's notes of my report today. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
And do I have questions of council? Councillor Prinzen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To Todd, just for clarity, what are you calling the commercial areas of Bloomfield and Wellington? As in, where do you start commercial and where do you stop? Just because the commercial areas seem to be expanding, I didn't know if we had definitive areas. Other than that, I support paid parking in Picton again. So I'm just trying to get some clarity on the other two.
Yeah, so related to Bloomfield and Wellington, I would suggest that we would start 2-hour limitation on parking where the commercial core properties start and where they end along the main street, predominantly in both Wellington and the Picton area. So I can't give you sort of cross streets. I don't have them specifically, but I would defer to the the bylaw department. We would work together and determine exactly, we can make it specific in the bylaw as to where they would begin and end in those two various areas.
Thanks. No, just as somebody who travels to Wellington and through Bloomfield, as probably Councillor St. Jean could support, is, you know, if we could be involved maybe a little bit on where those commercial areas, so I would just
between now and the next council meeting to get some definite definition as to where those areas are. We would also consult with Councillor Harper, the representative of Wellington.
Do I have any other questions or comments? Councillor Margetson.
Quick question. What is the time limit in Wellington and Bloomfield now, if we're changing it to 2 hours maximum?
Currently, there is no time limit in Bloomfield, and there's some. It's questionable as to when what the time limit is in Wellington.
So you're not suggesting we purchase and install signage, or I did not see that in there. Or are you suggesting that?
No, I would suggest that wherever there's a parking sign, I think we could put I'm not suggesting that we purchase and install signage for a temporary period, like a year, but if we can modify signage that already exists to indicate that it's only for 2 hours, which I think is possible, then we would do that.
Thank you. Mercifully, no more signs.
Do I have anyone else? Bear with me while I flick back and forth on the screen. I don't see any other hands up. Motion is on the floor. All in favor? That passes. Thank you. Moves us to motion 6.2, report of the Operations Department dated June 11th, 2020, regarding Waste Free Ontario Act updates, solid waste program changes, and the transition of the Blue Box program to extended producer responsibility. I have this as a Roberts motion, seconded by Councillor Hirsch. Councillor Roberts, would you please read that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That Council received report Op 06-2020 for information. That Council received the collaborative resolution from Quinte Waste Services Board in response to a request from the Association of Municipalities of Ontario to comment on the transition to full producer responsibility of the Blue Box program under the Waste Free Ontario Act. And 3, that Council direct staff to continue to participate in consultations with AMO, QWS, and other industry associations related to the transitioning of the Blue Box program and report back to Council on results of these consultations, as well as recommendations from Quinte Waste Solutions and the Waste Services Board.
Tanya, you're with us? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Do you have any comments that you wish to make on this?
The report is just an information report, basically, as it says, just bringing forward an update. I know that Councillor Harper is involved in the Waste Services Board, and so he was involved in the most recent discussions surrounding our response to AMO about the transition. And so we wanted to make sure that Council were aware that we were responding, sort of in collaboration with Quinte Waste Solutions, and that this will be ongoing, and just to make sure that you are also aware that we're going to just keep up on the consultations and keep bringing that information forward regarding this transition to the EPR.
Do I have questions of Council? Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tanya, I'm wondering for folks that are just public, that are just sort of listening in or watching in, if it would be worth doing like a 1-minute sort of summary of what is represented in this motion.
Sorry, that was a little bit choppy. I apologize. I didn't quite get all of your question, Councillor Roberts.
Through the chair, Tanya, I'm just wondering if it would be helpful for folks that are listening or watching in to get a bit of a summary of what this motion represents for residents here in the county.
I'm getting the summary for those who are listening, but a summary of what?
Perhaps it's too difficult to do here. Another time, perhaps.
Councillor Harper and then Councillor St. Jean.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I can maybe shed a little light on what Councillor Roberts, having obviously attended the meeting. So what's this, the Blue Box program is being evaluated. Now, the most important thing is it's not going to be something that we as residents feel, but basically they're transitioning the responsibility for the cost of the Blue Box program to the producers of the packaging that we put in our Blue Box. And that is a very big undertaking because it involves getting all these manufacturers and packaging manufacturers on side, getting a system in place to do so. And so there's a transition period in which that's going to happen over about a 3-year period beginning in 2023. And so what's happening is the AMO and the province are starting to say to municipalities, this coming, we can't promise you anything, but just considering your individual circumstances in your municipality, what time within that 3-year period would be best for you? What's happening for us in this region? We have 9 municipalities that are part of Equity Waste Solutions, we being one of the 3 big, there are another 5 or 6 smaller ones. And the board that meets to discuss it. And basically we had a little meeting a few weeks ago about it. When we weighed all the facts, we felt that it was in our best interest collectively and individually to delay to the sort of the latter part of that transition period. Part of the reason being we have a contract with a company called HGC. They're the ones that actually own all those trucks that pick stuff up, and they also run the sorting plant that takes all of our recycling and puts it into the respective bundles and ships it away. So that contract coming up in a year, and if we were to renew that contract and then we were to transition a year later, it wouldn't really make sense. So what we want to do is leave that transition to be put off as long as possible so we can get the possible contract renewal that is both satisfying the service levels as well as the cost implications. So that's why we put it off the way we did. And in the end, we don't have a whole lot of control over it, but they will take that under advisement. And then the final part of it is that in addition to recycling, we obviously all have garbage disposal as well. And there's a possibility, Madam CEO, have a word or two on this, but we at some point probably would be wise to look at consolidating our garbage management along with some of these other players. And again, putting off our decision longer helps us get the best deal for Prince Edward County.
Councillor St. Jean and then Councillor Hirsch.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe Councillor Harper addressed some of the questions, or one of the questions anyways, that I had. Other than, and I think it's just more for clarity for people that are watching, the ultimate intent is that the cost of all of our recycling programs be borne by the manufacturers who are essentially creating all of this extra waste, which is costing us, municipalities, and ultimately our taxpayers money. It's not a small budget line every year for us to pay for recycling. So I, for one, think it's a great step forward in making those who generate waste pay for waste. And I realize that, ultimately the taxpayer is also the consumer, but again, those who generate waste should pay for waste. And I very much look forward to seeing a zero budget line when it comes to our recycling programs some point in the future. Thank you.
Councillor Hirsch.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is either for Councillor Harper or for Tanya, if Tanya can hear us.
I can.
Can I assume that as part of these discussions, The actual scope of what gets recycled will be part of the conversation. You know, certain types of plastics, certain types of other products, and different municipalities have different coverage in terms of the program. I would hope that we don't see a reduction in the scope, and in fact, preferably, you know, an expansion, so that regardless of the cost issue, which is mostly what this is about, we do actually have the opportunity to be recycling more and more products. And the reason I ask the question, if this is part of the discussion, is if I was one of the producers, I would be angling for reduced coverage, not increased coverage, because the more stuff that's to be recycled means the more they're going to have to pay to fund that program. So could you enlighten us as to whether that scope of product coverage is part of this conversation? Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so I believe one of the main things that they're hoping to see come from this over to EPR is that producers and manufacturers will be more aggressive and more diligent in changing the type of packaging that they do use, so that they can reduce their costs as well. And I believe one of the things that will probably come from this as well will be more consistency in terms of what can be recycled and what can't. I believe that is the hope and two of the outcomes that they're looking for to see come from this particular model and transition into this particular system.
Councillor Hirsch, did you get the majority of that? I missed parts of it myself. Do I have anyone else who wishes to speak to this? Please keep your hands up so that I can check to make sure. Okay. With that in mind, I have the motion on the floor. I'll ask everybody to keep your hands up for a bit of a time so that Madam Clerk and I can both make sure we've got all the votes in. To this motion then, all in favor, hands up, please. Madam Clerk, I have everyone. Can you confirm that you do? That passes.
Thank you.
Moves us to item 6.3, report of the Development Services Department dated May 28th, 2020 regarding proposed planning process reforms to improve outcomes. And I have this as a St. Jean and Mayor Ferguson motion. Councillor St. Jean, would you read that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. St. Jean, Mayor Ferguson motion that report DS 53/2020 of the Development Services Department dated May 28th, 2020 be received for information, that a bylaw be presented to Council for enactment on June the 9th, 2020, in order to consolidate planning delegation of powers and duties of Council. And 3, that Council direct staff to update the terms of reference for the Planning Committee to reflect that it will meet the statutory public meeting obligations under the Planning Act, but decisions will be made by Council at a subsequent meeting. Could I ask for clarification on that, given the dates mentioned in the motion have passed?
Madam Clerk or Madam CAO?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the date would be June 23rd, 2020, as the complete report was deferred to today's meeting.
Yes. Thank you.
Do we need to change that on the text? Apparently not. Who's going to speak to this? I've got Crystal and I've got Matt or Madam CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I will speak to this report. It was authored by Paul Walsh, the Manager of Planning, who has since left the county for a new position. I've asked Crystal and Matt to join me to help answer any questions you would have. At a high level, this report is a response commitment that was made in January when we spoke, brought a report to council after budget, talking about a number of challenges with the planning process that we are aware of, as well as the fact that the planning process is not a fee recovered activity, and a number of things that we were going to do to make improvements. Notwithstanding the pressures that COVID-19 has put on the work in this area, we're pleased to report that we have been able to make some improvements and are back here with some recommendations to council. The report talks to some internal process improvements that we have made to improve the way applications are received and managed at the very front end of our steps in the process. This should allow for faster decisions elsewhere, as staff will spend the majority of their time on applications that are complete and with us, as opposed to pre-consultation inquiries when the materials are not yet available. So we are shifting the emphasis of our work. We're also talking about enhancing public consultation, particularly on confidential files, to make it clear that the county will take responsibility for ensuring adequate public consultation and the public interest has been addressed in planning files that come before us for recommendation to council for decision. It is part of the statutory requirements under the Planning Act, and while we ask that as part of a complete application that the proponent do a fair bit of consultation, it does not absolve us of our own responsibility, whether that be engaging with Indigenous partners and communities or the public at large. The meat of this in terms of areas that we're looking for council decision on is two things. One, we're asking council to agree to the delegation of authority of a number of matters similar to what was delegated to the CAO under the emergency bylaw as a permanent move to improve turnaround times and deal with routine and technical matters outside of council committee. And second, that we're asking that the planning committee itself, that you may recall there was a resolution Mayor Ferguson put forward asking us to look at the composition of planning committee along with other committees, which we have done. At this point, we're recommending that planning committee remain a committee of the whole, provided council support the delegation of authority that we're suggesting. This would leave planning committee to deal with the major issues of rezoning and rezoning and official plan type activities. Those would be committee of the whole, be with the full committee of the planning committee, but we're recommending that we remove the ability of planning committee to sit as council and make decisions on the same day. We would ask that the planning committee terms of reference be changed and that final decisions would have to go to council to allow for some time for that to be a true public consultation opportunity, for information and advice to be sought to address issues that come up in that consultation, and then at the next available council meeting, have council ratify decisions similar to the way the committee of the whole works today. So that is a high-level overview of the two main asks in this report and what we were trying to highlight in terms of some of the improvements that are being proposed.
Thank you. I already have Councillor Nyman, saw your hand up. Councillor Mcnaughton. After Councillor Nyman. Councillor Hirsch.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I only caught about half of what Madam CAO said there. And
oh, Christ.
What I'm getting now is I'm missing half a meeting, but I've got lots of questions on this. So I'll just put it out there that when it comes to council, I'll pull this motion again and so we can have another discussion on it. And hopefully we can hear the whole thing. So I'll wait I'll ask my questions then.
I believe I had Councillor Mcnaughton next.
Thank you. So to start with, we're already looking at positive steps, and I really appreciate the work that's been done so far. And I think having a two-step process at minimum is great. And the expanded, the efforts that you'll be making to create some policy, that staff will be making to create policies to expand the process of public consultation so that it's a real, true public consultation, and not what might be what has been perceived sometimes in the past, a consultation in appearance only. I think this is a very positive step, and I look forward to seeing what you come up with. I do have a couple of questions. And one of them might be very easy to answer. It's regarding peer review currently. Are there currently guiding policies that dictate when peer review is required? Because it's sort of an area I'm not clear on, because sometimes there's peer review, sometimes it's not required. And is there sort of an absence of concrete guiding policy right now, and that's what you hope to address with that particular bylaw?
So I would just say that our official plan is under review and hoping to come forward as a complete document soon as well. But what we lack is a complete submission bylaw that says what is required. There's a lot of case-by-case flexibility around the studies that are required. And then the peer review occurs when we do not have the internal expertise to evaluate that particular study. So it depends sometimes on the complexity, and in some areas we regularly seek external advice in a peer review based on the technical nature and not having that in-house. So it's a bit of a combination, but the idea is that we would work towards being more transparent about what is the requirements and why those requirements are necessary as a step after the official plan gets updated and we bring that forward. I don't know, Matt, if there's anything else you want to add to that?
I can just add, normally our peer review requirements deal with complex planning applications where there's an environmental impact study, for example, or a complex stormwater management report. We will ask that those be peer reviewed. We do rely on Quinte Conservation for some of that service. They have a hydrogeologist on staff, so we do rely on Quinte Conservation to review hydrological reports. But for more complex files, we do have to outsource that out to a consulting firm.
So the terms of reference will give a certain degree more predictability, but there's still going to be some case-by-case needs that can never be predicted in advance, I'm assuming?
That's correct. I think there's always going to be like minor applications that staff can review and make our own determinations and recommendations. But for some of the more complex files, complex subdivisions, site plans, and even some change of use zoning applications will still require resources from planning or engineering consulting firms.
Okay, I do have more, but I'll wait for a second round. Thanks. Add me to the list.
Councillor Hirsch.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I'm very, very pleased with this entire package. We've been waiting for a while, and a number of reasons to be pleased. Staff has applied lean principles of doing a value stream assessment and coming up with a new internal process. And that new internal process promises to be faster and simpler and clearer to the public than ever before. Enhanced public consultation process is great. The whole clarity of the application process is what the public has been asking for. And I think that all gets achieved through what we're being told here, and fully in favor of the delegation of authority, getting some of the sillier stuff off of our table and just letting staff get on with it. So all in all, this package is a result of us hiring a great planner to be our CAO, and I support the whole thing 100%. Thank you.
I would just say it's a very strong staff effort. You don't change internal processes unless everyone gets involved, and there's a lot of commitment to do well in the planning department.
Do I have Councillor Margetson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I echo Councillor Hirsch's comments. And I think it's good that we're trying to improve the processes as much as we have this procedure outlined. I think the ability of staff to assess the requirements and have good judgment, and if they can develop that line of thinking, that department will come a long way in association with the written guidelines. The only thing that I wanted to add, and I did send an email before, and I want to say, first of all, that I support the delegated authority. I believe it's important that staff be able to make those decisions, and I feel that they don't all need to come to council. Council might remember, and Madam CAO, that I did raise the issue of the site plan, and I raised it because there's been a number of cases already since I've been on council where the site plan was a, we've used the word contested here, or minor. What's minor? And I know you try to define it, but that site plan seemed to be an important element that council really got into the discussions about the site plan, and it was for the type of developments we get in Prince Edward County. And the one we had in Hillier not long ago, we had a rezoning and we put the holding provision on, and a lot of the councillors around the table said to me that we have, at least council will have an opportunity to approve the site plan when we remove the holding provision. And that could be some other big developments that we may be looking at in the future. So I just wanted to raise that issue again about site plans, and also I feel that councillors do have local knowledge and experience perhaps with some of the sites, and to exclude them in the process of assessing the final site plan may not be in the best interest of the municipality. So I put that out there. I don't know if we can define minor, but I noticed you put that in there and the other options considered, but I hope you acknowledge my comment as far as being trying to be practical, not to take away staff's ability to make those decisions, but just trying to optimize and be the best decision makers collectively that we can be. That's it for me. Thank you.
Do I have anyone else before I wheel back to Kate? Councillor Maynard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I too am greatly encouraged and support the steps that staff are taking and working towards taking to make our planning process more efficient and timely. And as the report states, there's a wide degree of interest by council on planning issues. So I want to make sure that we are, that remains. I think that probably after budget, planning our community is likely the most, in my opinion, the most important, one of the most important things that we do. Somewhat in the same vein as Councillor Margetson, although there are a fair number in this list of things that I think we can easily delegate authority to, I would still propose that we have a slightly staged approach to that delegation of authority component. And this would also allow some time to see how the internal efficiencies improve the planning process. I'm a little bit concerned and would like to see that we maybe hold on to a while the setting of different criteria for urban and rural consents. Well, typically urban consents may be a little less contentious. It's not always that way. So I think we should have the same process regardless of whether it's urban or rural. And then there is some, whether it's minor or not minor is a little bit concerning. And on page 53, where it talks about the risks, well, staff would have delegated authority for matters that for matters that are known to be contested or controversial, staff could choose to bring the matter to council for decision. Well, after, after this 10, now 11 years, sometimes you don't know whether it's going to be contested. I mean, we are going to be a while before our public outreach and consultation gets to the point where people don't see it on the agenda, or their neighbor sees it on the agenda and they show up to make a delegation or a deputation in front of council. So I will, I'll forward this list, but there's only a few, right? Like I'm fine with the minor variances, exemption of part lot control, the condominium, removing of holding symbols, but maybe on the site plan, like maybe for us to hold on to all consents for at least the short term, so that we can kind of transition in a way through the delegation. And the report, I look forward to the second part for staff, second, third, fourth parts. And if our CAO has any comments on how we might do kind of a staggered or a staged approach to the delegation of authority.
So through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Maynard, I would say that if there are particular pieces of delegation that council as a group does not support at this time, then the best way to be, that's partly why we're at the committee of the whole, so that when the bylaw comes forward, we could amend it. This is a draft, and then we can amend it before it comes for final council decision. I would say the uncontested settlement area consent piece was part of what was delegated to the CAO under the pandemic, and was used in a few places where I think there's been a technical reason why smaller developments require consents because they're not as big as a subdivision. So, which is a different kind of thing than I think turning farmland or rural land into residential. It has impacts on surrounding uses as well as groundwater and other kinds of things. So we saw those as very different, which is why we made that distinction. When it comes to site plan, I hear what you're saying as well as Councillor Margetson. I would just say that site plan is probably the single largest pain point. I remember this from my time at the province, and I've heard it echoed by developers here in the county. It's the very technical part of the process. A site plan agreement is, under the Planning Act, not appealable by a third party. Typically, it is the technical details of how you're going to realize what was a council decision around zoning or official plan use for a site. And under the Planning Act, it is supposed to be a 30-day decision, which we never make. Most municipalities never make that. So it is probably one of the more contentious places where it does become a much bigger conversation than I think the Planning Act envisions it to be, and is a constant pain point. So there's ways to either remove site plan from this delegation list, or allows amendments to existing site plan agreements, like expansions or changing mortgagees on a site plan, those kinds of things, versus a whole new site plan. So there's different ways we could look at it. So in terms of staging, the way would be that we bring forward a bylaw with the things that you're comfortable with, or we can talk about that at council, and then anything, we could always revisit this at a later time to add or remove things.
Thank you.
Mayor Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can everybody hear me? Got some technical difficulties here. Anybody? So I hope you can hear me. I just want to, a couple of things. Probably the biggest complaint that I have heard since the beginning of the term was the complications and difficulty in dealing with Prince Edward County's planning process. And I've heard it from, whether it's individual residents or developers or business people. So the work that's been undertaken in this report is extremely time-flying, greatly appreciative of it. This has been a matter of conversation with at least 2 former or previous CAOs. So congratulations to Marcy and the planning staff for getting this together. And I think it ticks so many of the right boxes in that, staff has been considered, the process has been considered, the consultation process is being considered, and this is particularly important when we're dealing with COVID and making sure that the public have an opportunity to weigh in on particularly significant projects that may affect their environment. So, that is something that obviously has to go through further discussion. The delegation of authority, that's proposed here, yes, there may be some amendments and some adjustments, but I think this is worthwhile and is going to, speed up the process, not just for the proponents, but also for for members of council and our council meetings. So I look forward to hearing more about this, and there'll be further discussion, but I think this is such a quantum leap forward in my mind to simplifying the process and providing accountability and more engagement by the public. So congratulations, and thank you very much for this.
Before I go back to Councillor Mcnaughton, do I have anyone else who wishes to go through the first round? Councillor Mcnaughton, it's all yours.
I think possibly Councillor Margetson and Councillor Maynard have already said it. The list of the list under the delegation bylaw is understandable and very good. I would still want to see ward representation, at least for minor variances. And I had a question mark next to site plans as well. So yeah, pretty much just echoing. So thank you. Oh, there is one last thing. So referred to in the report is that contentious 120 meters for notifying 120 meter radius for notifying the neighbors. We've seen that at council a few times in the discussion, points in the direction that there might be some feelings that 120 meters is inadequate in rural areas. And I understand it's probably dictated by the Planning Act as a minimum. I don't know if it's dictated with a period at the end or whether there is some flexibility on that 120 meters and whether we would be able to look at a different urban and rural standard. So there's.
Crystal, could you answer that question in light of our official plan?
Sure. So you could exceed public notification and consultation requirements as long as you have official plan policies that speak to that. So we could add something like that into the official plan in our implementation policies to support something like that.
So that would, that's when we would address that, when we reconsult on the incoming official plan. Thank you.
Yes.
Councillor Mcnaughton just asked one of my questions, which is exactly that. In a rural area like mine, if you do 120 meters, you're only going to hit 3 houses. It should perhaps be longer than that. The other question that I have, Madam CAO, fees and charges. I believe in the material it suggests there's going to be an update to the fees and charges bylaw. Will this be a separate thing, or do we have to go through this process before we can go to this fees and charges?
So technically it could have been all together, but the decision we made from a staff perspective was that And in hearing from the development community, they don't want to pay more for service that isn't better. So we're trying to fix the way the process works before we cost out what that would look like in terms of a proper fee and charge bylaw. I would also like to see the official plan approved before, in case that has implications on the process. So I would see that we would try to bring a fee and charges bylaw update before the next budget. So something towards the end of the year.
Thank you. Do I have any other questions or comments? And please keep your hand up as I scan my screen. I see none. I have the motion on the floor that this be received for information. Can I have a vote, please? All those in favor? 4, 5, 6. Madam Clerk, I have a majority in favor and 2 not voting. Can I see, sorry, while I'm there then, thank you. Can I see votes opposed? That passes. We move on then to item 6.4, a report of the community services programs and initiatives dated June 9th, 2020 regarding review of the community and economic development terms of reference. Can I have Councillor Hirsch, seconded by Councillor Bullock. Councillor Hirsch, can you bring this forward, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a Hirsch-Bullock motion that Council receive report CSP 31/2020 for information, and that Council direct staff to bring a report to Council with recommended revisions to the Community and Economic Development Commission's terms of reference and subsequent bylaw.
Todd? Are you speaking to this one?
Happy to, Councillor Bailey. So through you, as you know, before we bring back any of the committees, we are doing some work on terms of reference for each. We've already, you folks have already reviewed 4 terms of reference and brought 4 committees back. I think the intention of the Clerk's Department is to bring terms back at the next meeting of Council for another set of committees, including the Community Economic Development Commission. And so acknowledging the fact that this committee or commission is a little different than the regular committee structures that we have, we wanted to reach out to Council and get some feedback on both areas of mandate, potential for some committees, and what you would like us to do with the membership. We have a shorter term for our citizen members to 2 years. And so if we were going to bring them back, it would mean 5 more meetings, and then we would have to then reevaluate who is sitting on that body. And so we're asking for some direction as to whether you want to extend the membership to 4 years. We have a vacant position at chair. We also have a vacant citizen member seat currently. We have a youth member who is going off to university in September. So I'd like some direction. We're seeking some direction on that, and we're seeking some direction on some areas of mandate. So we proposed a couple of different ideas about things that this group could tackle. They're not it's not an exhaustive list. It's more provided to you to encourage discussion and provide us with some direction. So we talked about things. We asked things like asked about items like dealing with the boardwalk situation in Picton Harbor. Talked a little bit about some other areas around, we have a request on the table from the Learning Center to create a committee around food security that may be appropriate. There's some social and economic issues that come to Council on a regular basis that may be better suited to a body of this nature. And so that's what we're sort of recommending or encouraging you to give us some direction on today. Happy to take any questions and would welcome your feedback.
What questions do I have from Council? Mayor Ferguson. Kate.
Thank you. Just a couple of things. I think given the situation we have with COVID, I think extending the term to 4 years is appropriate. I mean, we don't know how long we're going to be in our current set of circumstances, but it's going to be, I fear, a fair amount of time. So I think that's a reasonable request. The other thing is that we, and I'd like to hear what everybody else has to say, obviously, but I think this group, as I know them, is capable of doing more, and we are going to have to consider and seriously figure out how we are going to go through the midterm and longer term recovery process as a result of COVID, and the ways in which the county is likely to be affected by the changes that COVID will bring about, not just locally, but also from a societal perspective, and what those will mean to us. But, be interested to hear what everybody has to say, but those are some initial thoughts on my part. But this is I think a motivated group that is capable of doing more and putting more thoughts into some of the projects that are outlined in the report, as well as others that may be brought before them that could enable council to make more informed decisions. So those, as I say, are my initial thoughts.
Councillor Mcnaughton.
Thank you. So I actually can't, because of technical difficulties, I can't call up the report right now so that I can quote it, but I appreciated some of the thoughts that were in the report. And I do like what Mayor Ferguson said. I think we've got a lot of difficult conversations coming up to look at how we move forward. And as a result, and I think the CEDC should be activated as much as possible to look at the social fabric of our community's needs and the institutions that help to bridge some of the gaps in our community. I would prefer, just practically, I would prefer that the CEDC look to re-advertise for the 2 open spots, looking specifically for people with lived experiences for some of the CEDC's stated priorities, which I believe relate to, I can't remember and I can't load it, housing, food insecurity, people, I'm pretty much thinking people who have struggled with housing, who've used social services, who've been involved with the police, people with lived experiences which we don't have at our table, at the council table, and the CEDC, unless I'm incorrect, doesn't have anyone with lived experiences of needing access to those programs and institutions at their table either, although that could be that I could be off base. But when you've got those voices, people who live with, who struggle with incomes that are bound by seasonal employment, or people who've, who've accessed services or have experienced gaps in services, I think they could bring some meaningful information, and representation matters. So the other thing is, regarding the terms of reference specifically, I would love to see the youth rep become a voting member. I don't know why it isn't. And I would absolutely support the expansion to 4 years for the current membership and for the terms of reference going forward. And that's it.
Todd, you have a comment to make.
Just thank you, Councillor Mcnaughton. Through you, Councillor Bailey, to Mcnaughton. I appreciate all of your feedback. The one thing I agree that we would need to I would need to do, if we're going to expand the terms, and I don't disagree that we probably should based on lack of meetings, COVID related issues. We have commitments from the remaining citizen members until the end of 2020. So at the same time as we may go out and seek 2 new members to fill the vacant positions, I would also seek commitments from the remaining members who sit on that table if they want to continue to serve for the other 2 years, to be honest.
Right, so conceivably it could even be more, and you want to also replace the youth.
Yes, absolutely. Right. And I can't speak to why the youth, the decision was made around why the youth was not a voting member prior to my having any responsibilities related to this group. However, Councillor Roberts was the chair, I believe, when the youth was brought on. He may be able to have a little bit more institutional knowledge than I do. I would make the looking at the age of the individual, the vote may have been related to the fact that there was a very real possibility that the person sitting at the table would be under the age of the legal voting age, but I can't confirm that for sure.
I have Councillor Harper and then Councillor Roberts.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. The first thing for me, the chairman resigned. And do we understand why the chairman resigned? And have we really got to the root of, is there a fundamental problem with this group, this commission, and what its role is, and vis-a-vis, Todd's group, for example? In my short time as councillor, I struggled to understand the distinction between what the commission was doing and what Todd's group is doing. And when we would see a presentation from, it felt a presentation from Neil for the commission, it felt very much like it was covering the work of his group. So it feels like, to go back to Todd's language, the areas of the mandate versus the terms of reference, I don't know if we see those as 2 distinct things, but it feels like it's at a very fundamental level. We have to figure out what its role is in the broad scheme of things and how it complements the talents and the experience that we have on staff. And so for me, that's the highest level of discussion that we need to have before we get into the details of putting out to advertise for potential members. So, for example, the membership and what should that membership consist of? Does it make sense that it be citizens versus people with real experience and expertise in economics, for example? So that's the conversation I feel we need to have first.
Madam CAO, you wish to speak.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just say that this report, I completely agree with you, Councillor Harper. That's what this report was trying to do, knowing that we can change the terms of reference, but that is a process step. What really we're proposing here is that twofold. Like with all the other committees that are supported by the clerk's office now, instead of a single department, this would allow us, it shouldn't be a committee that reflects a single department in the county. It should reflect, it should be served by all the departments based on what the need of the committee is for information and support. But the second area is that there are some really complicated issues that the county struggles to, that the county struggles with. There's some really big issues the county struggles with that don't nicely fit in a single department. And my perspective, and I think echoed by Todd and some of the other on the leadership team, is that there needs to be a place that can handle some of this complexity to bring forward recommendations to council to talk about options about important public space in the long term, and how we want to deal with places like the Wellington Beach area, or how we want to deal with the Picton Harbor, or thorny issues like where community wellness needs to go next, or how we truly tackle poverty issues, and what is the role of the municipality versus all the other partners in the community and what they should be doing. And so it doesn't always fit that it should be led by staff to council as if it's 100% owned by the municipality as an issue for us to solve. And we think this committee or this commission has an opportunity to really bring partners together and have bigger conversations. But it's gotten a little stuck in an agenda that is very tied to a single department. We think with COVID-19 and as we move beyond that, there were issues that were not being resolved before then, and now they're sort of even more important. So we would like to refresh this committee in a way that would allow a voice for those issues.
Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the student or youth representative, when I brought forward that idea to the CEDC, it was in the context of several charities and not-for-profits and the school counseling officer individual saying that there was a significant amount of youth alienation from the process of governance in the county. And the commission is by terms of reference, more nimble than trying to get a student rep on council, for example. So a student rep on the commission was there to provide an opportunity for interested youth to engage with governance, and also to represent youth concerns in a way that would be unstressful and hopefully a bit freewheeling. The notion of voting or not voting, I think, was because first time around, I think it was a 16-year-old, and there was some concern with the individual and with staff that that might incur some liability. But voting would be, from my perspective, fine as long as the student or the youth involved, wasn't under stress. Secondly, in terms of where the CAO and Todd are going with this, I think we're looking at sort of 3 steps. We had the initial several working groups, which were in large part about where the heck are we now and what does this mean and what's happening to us. They no longer are meeting. We moved into the Mayor's Economic Recovery Team, which is all right. What do we have to do now and what needs to be initiated and how do we position ourselves for recovery? That MERT, perhaps with reason, is pretty focused around, hospitality, tourism, accommodation, wineries, etc. So that's understandable. But as we move into what I think Mayor Ferguson referenced is, the years ahead, I think the commission is well placed, or should be well placed, or should have the architecture in place to be able to look at issues that are going to be coming our way over the next 2-year period. Councillor Maynard, am I interrupting you? No. Okay. So we have a 2 or 3 year task at hand, and the commission could well be that vehicle. As I said, more nimble, less bureaucratic, and hopefully of more utility to council itself. I have one practical question to ask of staff. On page 64, when we look at terms of reference, it's not clear to me, perhaps because I'm not that smart, that the actual terms of 2 years are not applicable to all the commissioners, so citizen and council commissioners. I remember early in this term of council, it was mentioned at council that they were 2-year terms. That was certainly the intention when I was chair, that it would morph to 2-year terms. So if it is everyone as 2-year term, when are those 2-year terms up? What would the renewal process be? And if we move to 4-year terms, are the persons there with the 2-year terms automatically absorbed into a 4-year tenure? Thanks.
Councillor Maynard. Sorry, Councillor Maynard, give me 1 moment.
Yeah.
Madam Clerk.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just to address Councillor Roberts' question, we could certainly address the term limits for citizens and council members in the revised terms of reference and bring that forward, taking into consideration what you've said, Councillor Roberts, about term limits perhaps being different for citizen members and council members.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Councillor Maynard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not quite sure what Councillor Roberts, I was just rearranging some notes, so no, I wasn't, you weren't interrupting me. So I think we need to go back and start at the mandate, because I mean, if it was created to improve transparency and provide input on the community development activities in the municipality, that is, I think what we're envisioning is something broader than that. And if we want them doing more, which I think they have the capacity to do, I would talents that are on that commission. I don't particularly see the value in adding another layer of bureaucracy or another layer of, you know, government to existing or potential working ad hoc committees. I mean, there's committees out there, specialized ones that are going ahead. They're presenting their stuff to council. So oftentimes what I've seen in my term on the commission and perhaps prior to that was that there's lots of good brainstorming and there's lots of good ideas, but when it actually comes down to making a recommendation to council, they're looking for it's general direction back to staff to prepare a report. And I'd like to see a point where that committee got to preparing the report with some assistance, but because it has in a lot of ways become I don't really think we need to work on clarifying the mandate, the true working committee, because often we see duplications, right? Like we'll see it then 2 weeks later in front of council anyways, right? Like they do a strategic exercise prior to council strategic action. I don't know this today, but I would some of the ideas and where we can. And I'll just say that I was putting the chair resentments. So a structural issue and the needs a little guidance and maybe a little more
questions, Councillor.
Thank you. And I'm supporting it in the context of AO. I would support a high level that this committee's offering. Feedback or from commission would and I don't know the reason and I would like to look at the relevance of. I looked at their 2009 priorities: housing development, transport, agriculture. Like we keep talking about the same things and everybody's doing the same thing. And so if it's looking at this group, what they can do for us, I'm sure they've got a lot of good members on there, but I'd like to see it come back to us with some relevance of what they can offer this council as another committee, because it seems like everybody's doing the same thing and we're all supporting agriculture. So that's what I want to see out of this. Thanks.
And do I have anyone else who wishes to speak to this? Hold your hands up if you do. I see no other hands. I have the motion on the floor to receive this for information. Can I get the vote, please? All in favor?